Good evening, everybody. We can start. And welcome everyone to this meeting of the Local Plan Subcommittee. Welcome to members of the committee who are present, officers, and anyone watching via the Council's YouTube channel. I'll start with apologies for absence. I have apologies from Councillors Butland, Coleridge and Hume. Everyone else is here. Councillor Abbott, I know, does need to leave by 7 o'clock because he has another committee he needs to chair. So I just would note that. And I know this is obviously very important meeting, but I think there's a reasonably good chance we might be finished by 7 o'clock. Not that I want to stop anybody from speaking and making their comments. Item 2, declarations of interest. Is there anyone who would like to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest relating to gender? Councillor Thorogood?
I spoke to governance, so I did query some wording of the sustainability appraisal at the local plan modifications stage. I've talked it through with Emma Wisby, and she's happy for me to stay and discuss and vote.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Non-pecuniary interest as a member of Rivenall Parish Council, which has made representations throughout the process, and also as an individual councillor and as councillor, I've made both representations and taken part in the process. But as I've previously taken advice, I've been advised because it doesn't affect me very specifically, I can take part.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, I don't see anyone else. To item 3, I have the minutes of the last meeting, which was the 13th of June. Is everyone happy that I sign those minutes? Can I have a mover and seconder? Thank you, Councillor Cunningham, and Councillor Scattergood seconding. Thank you. Okay, in that case, we can now move on to the item on the agenda for this evening, which is the Braintree District Draft Local Plan, Section 2, Adoption.
Sorry, Councillor.
Sorry.
Item 4, question time.
Oh, so sorry.
We don't have any speakers.
Well, yes, item 4, question time. We actually don't have any speakers. Thank you, Alison. Apologies, everyone. So, item 5, agenda item, Braintree District Draft Local Plan, Section 2, Adoption, and I'll go to Emma Goodings, who's going to present the item. Emma.
Good morning, members. Good afternoon, evening, and apologies for delaying, and thank you for slightly delaying your meeting. Have we got the presentation slides? So I'll kick off while we're waiting for those slides to come up. So members, the report and appendices that you have before you today is to note the findings of the planning inspectors on the Section 2 local plan and to consider whether you are recommending to Council that the local plan Section 2 be adopted. Next slide please, Gary. So for the benefit of anyone watching at home, the Section 2 local plan together with the previously adopted Section 1 plan will now make up the development plan for the district. The Section 2 plan allocates housing and employment space to meet the requirements for both, which were approved in the Section 1 plan, as well as protecting land for community education and open spaces use. It sets the Braintree key vision, objectives and spatial strategy, building on the vision for North Essex in the Section 1 plan, and it contains all the policies to guide all planning applications in the district. Next slide, please. To recap on how we've got here, there are something like 150 pieces of evidence base that are published on the Council's evidence pages. We've had 3 rounds of public consultation on the document, from the first principles in the issues and options to the draft plan in 2017. We've had overall around 8,000 comments submitted into the process, which have been received, read, reviewed and published online. We did approximately 130 hours of manned exhibitions across the district. We had 2 leaflets to all properties in the district and a significant number of emails, newspapers and social media posts across the local plan period. So we submitted the local plan to the planning inspectorate, as you remember, in October 2017. The Planning Inspectorate chose to split the plan into two and examine the Section 1 of the plan jointly with Colchester and Tendring. That was examined and then adopted in February 2021. Oral hearing sessions on the Section 2 plan, the Braintree specific part of the Section 2, took place in 2 weeks in July last year, and we had a proposed main modifications consultation in December and January. Next slide, please. So I think the last time this committee talked about the local plan, it was the end of November last year, and we were considering and approving the proposed main modifications for consultation. That consultation took place for 7 weeks between December 2021 and January this year. At the time, as well as consulting on those proposed main modifications, we consulted on additional modifications, which are minor changes to the policy and text, which the slides are not moving, but I'll carry on talking and we'll catch back up. Yes, so as well as consulting on the main modifications from the inspector, we consulted on the additional modifications which carry through the proposed main modifications into the policy and text. And then we also considered and consulted upon an addendum to the sustainability appraisal and an updated habitats regulation assessment. So this consultation was publicised in the usual way. It was publicised online, in print media, directly to all those key stakeholders, those who wished to be notified and those on the planning newsletter. This was both before and after the Christmas period, so people had a reminder after the Christmas break. All those responses were published in full online on the consultation portal just after the close of the consultation period, and those that related to the SA, the main modifications and the HRA were sent directly to the planning inspectors to consider. We had a total of 170 comments around that consultation period, most of them on the main modifications, but some on other parts of the additional modifications in the SA. So the inspector's report and its accompanying appendix are Appendix 1 and 2 to your report tonight. This was received on the 14th of June this year and published a day later on the website and brought to the attention of members in an email, as well as stakeholders and on social media. As members will have read in that report, the inspectors confirmed that the legal duties on consultation and duty to cooperate have been fully met. The letter then goes on to consider each section of the local plan, and those sections broadly accord to the chapters and topics in the local plan. The inspectors go through the policies, each of the policies in the plan, they provide comments on them, and they also talk about if there are additions or modifications, why those additions or modifications are made. These modifications, these main modifications, are then set out in the appendix which accompanies the letter, which is the additions in bold and deletions as strike through. Although the formatting of the table, as you've probably seen in your printout, has gone slightly awry, that was how we received it from the inspectors. So Appendix 3 of your report tonight, as supplied to you in hard copy, is the full local plan. So that includes the Section 1 local plan, the Section 2 local plan that you're considering tonight, and also the accompanying maps. This is a fully amended version, and as such, paragraph and policy numbers may not necessarily match up exactly to the table that you see in the inspector's letter, because we've had to remove several policies and add paragraph numbers, etc. So the numbering has changed slightly. So on your table today when you arrived, hopefully you will have found a page which is to replace a particular page in the plan. With apologies, paragraph 4.63, which was a supporting text to the Fearing Strategic Growth location, had not been amended as per our additional advertised main modification. So we've remedied that within the draft that we've circulated to you, and it's the plan with that revised wording in which we're seeking your approval on tonight. Next slide, please. So I thought, members, that it might be helpful just to consider at this point, looking at the plan as it was submitted in 2017 and looking at the plan now, and considering what has changed and what has not over the course of that process. So starting with what has not changed, sorry. So the garden communities have been removed throughout the plan, and minor updates to language or because of the passage of time have taken place. So, for example, noting that in this document it refers to the NPPF 2012 rather than the updated NPPF. But those parts of the plan which therefore are substantially unchanged are the vision and key objectives, the broad spatial strategy of this plan. We've made no new housing allocations or changes to development boundaries unless the site has been granted planning permission in the interim period between the local plan being submitted. We haven't made any changes to open spaces, visually important spaces, playing fields and green buffers, all of which remain allocated and protected. The policy on affordable housing, so those percentages of 30 or 40% affordable housing, remain unchanged, as well as the site sizes. The number of gypsy and travelling showperson plots has not changed, and the policies on securing infrastructure and also for monitoring haven't changed. In addition, most of the policies in the plan are unchanged in their substance, although some have minor wording changes and updates within them. But something have changed more substantially. On the next slide, please. To start with, many of the site-specific policies, and we have a number of site-specific policies for our most complex sites and our largest sites in the district. These have been updated and amended largely to reflect evidence-based updates, to reflect any planning permissions that have since been granted on site, or to reflect more detailed plans which we may have. Cressingtide Green was omitted in error from the list of villages in the previous submitted plan, and this has been added as a second-tier village. References to the use class orders in relation to employment and retail in particular have also been amended throughout the plan. This in practice means that some of the policies are more permissive than we had originally intended, and that's because the use classes have changed and more uses fall within single use classes. 3 policies have also been deleted. The design of employment policy areas has been deleted because it was felt that it repeated other design policies within the plan. The site-specific policy on the Dutch nursery has been deleted as the site is now substantially completed. And the enabling development policy, which is in the heritage chapter, has also been deleted as Historic England considered this an unnecessary repeat of national policy. Next slide, please. The inspectors have also removed the proposed restriction we had in policy for hot food takeaways within 400 metres of schools, although the requirement for the submission of a health impact assessment still remains and the policy overall still remains, but that particular restriction has been removed by the inspectors. The open spaces policy, the flooding policy and the protected sites policies have been substantially reordered and additional references have been added. And clarification has been made in the policy and supporting text of the renewable energy schemes to confirm the government policy position, which is that a further development plan document would be needed on locations suitable for wind turbines before the council can approve any onshore wind turbines. Next slide, please. I've also picked up just a couple of policies where there have been more substantial changes. So first, this is policy LPP 52. So for those of you on the planning committee, you'll no doubt become very familiar with this policy, as it's our main design policy. In the inspector's letter, they have added a reference to biodiversity net gain into this policy for the first time. They have added that reference in that it should reflect national policy. National policy will be coming in next year with a 10% biodiversity net gain. So they have reflected that and added that into the policy, which is really helpful. They have also changed the wording of transport impact to reflect the wording in the MPPF around the severe impact on the transport network. A reference to foul water drainage has been added, while the reference to highest standards of design has been changed to high, as highest was considered to be subjective, whereas high they preferred. And reference to the Essex Design Guide, particularly where we have the policies around back-to-back distances, for example, or garden sizes, which we reflect in this policy. The wording has been changed to have regard to the Essex Design Guide rather than have compliance with it, because we cannot require compliance with a non-adopted document, and the Essex Design Guide is just a guide. Next slide, please. So finally, the main and probably the main policy in terms of substance changes for the local plan is the new policy LPP 72 on resource efficiency, energy generation and energy efficiency, which was previously 2 policies within the local plan. As members will remember from our discussion on the proposed main modifications, the inspectors have removed the requirement for renewable energy on site. We were suggesting 10 or 20%. They've removed that requirement as they felt it wasn't in line with national policy, and they replaced it with a 19% energy performance improvement. However, this has already been overtaken by the new building regs, which came into force in June. We also added in here, though, an additional requirement for water efficiency and a new requirement for commercial buildings over 500 square metres to be BREEAM Very Good. Next slide, please. Finally, just moving on to the housing trajectory, you'll see from the local plan that there's a full housing trajectory for the lifetime of the local plan as one of the appendixes to it. The trajectory as submitted was obviously based on 2017 figures, and so this has been completely replaced by an updated trajectory, which was a position as of the 31st of March 2021, which was the up-to-date position prior to the oral hearing sessions. The updates you'll see that we made to the original trajectory are in red, so they're easier to read through. We've also added a figure showing the scale of housing target change in the district across the last 20 years, which the inspector also suggested we added into that section. Next slide, please. So then finally, moving on to the accompanying sustainability appraisal of the Section 2 local plan. An addendum to the original local plan Section 2 essay was produced and published alongside the proposed main modifications to consider their impacts on the plan. A revision to that has now been produced, and this was circulated to members on Friday electronically. It is over 400 pages, so we haven't printed that out for you today, but if anyone wants to print a copy, I'm happy to provide them one. Next slide, please. So the essay addendum has been amended to take into account the final wording of the main modifications. The context has been updated to present day. The policy wording, the final revised policy wording has been included, and our essay consultants have analysed those changes and made some minor or technical changes to their sort of analysis section. The overall conclusion has been advanced to include the final next steps, but the conclusions and impacts of the plan related to the SASEA and its policies and allocations remain unchanged. The Habitats Regulation Assessment has also been considered again by our consultants. Again, they've updated the policy wording to reflect the final proposed policy wording, but as these changes are minor, they haven't considered it necessary to update any of the conclusions or the impacts that the plan gives. So, the conclusion on the next slide, I won't repeat it to you because it's in your pack, but that was the entire conclusion of the local plan examiner's letter. So they concluded paragraphs 149 and 150 that subject to the main modifications, which are contained within the inspector's letter, that the plan is sound, and that we can now choose whether we want to adopt it or not. Next slide, please. So just in terms of those next steps, if you approve these recommendations tonight, then it will go on to Council on the 25th of July. If approved at Council, it would be adopted and it would replace the 2011 Core Strategy and the Local Plan Review 2005 as the main development plan documents for the district. There is a 6-week legal challenge period to pass after that Council decision, but we see no obvious signs of legal challenge on the plan. We'll also be getting so the PDF version of the local plan and the maps is already all online, but we're looking at getting an interactive version of the plan also online so people can zoom into the maps and use it. And we'll also be making hard copies available at libraries and here at the office and in other places across the district. So I'm happy to answer any questions, and we have the 2 recommendations for this report on page 5 and 6 of your agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Excellent presentation. So I'm going to open this up now for comments and questions. I have Councillor Cunningham first, and then Councillor Abbott and Councillor Thorogood. Councillor Cunningham.
Madam Chairman, first of all, can I thank Emma for the presentation this evening. I'm very mindful that if the Local Plan Subcommittee are minded to agree the recommendations and recommend to full Council, that this will actually be the last meeting of this Local Plan Subcommittee discussing this local plan. And I've been a member of this committee since 2015. I think we've got some new colleagues, but colleagues have come and gone during that period. It has been a long process. Those meetings, those long meetings, those call for site meetings through the summer of 2016 still very much live on in the memory. And as we are sort of coming to the end of the process, I hope colleagues would just indulge me in the absence of the leader, and on behalf of my Conservative colleagues, if I just offered some acknowledgement and a few thanks. As I say, we will be discussing this at full council fully, but this has been a long process, and these are difficult, sensitive matters. The implications of the decision making last not just for months, but years and decades. And I would, on behalf of our group, just like to acknowledge the political role played by certain individuals. First of all, Madam Chairman, as the Chairman of the local plan for this council administration, and with that the portfolio holder. The early days of the refresh of the plan, that was Councillor Lady Newton, who brought her tremendous experience to it. And during the 2015-19 council, Councillor Mrs Bowers-Flint chaired the local plan, and for the second half of that administration, she was the portfolio holder. Throughout, Councillor Butland has been the leader of the council. As I say, these matters are sensitive. There's no more sensitive matters possibly that we deal with than planning, never more so than strategic planning. Providing political leadership on these matters, as I'm sure colleagues right across the country will attest, is difficult because you're never going to please everybody, and the implications of these decisions are very high. And sometimes, due to the sensitivity of these matters, I think sometimes the disapproval, the complexity, tends to be embodied in the individual. Criticism tends to be labelled at the individuals rather than the actual policy. And for those who are in those roles, that comes with a high burden, but also it can come with high political stakes. And I think it's important, as we draw to a close, to acknowledge the role played by the members I've identified and thank them very, very much. From an officer level, I'd like to acknowledge the role of the directors during that time. In recent years, Dominic Collins, before that, John Hayden's energetic leadership on these matters, pivotal in working with other local authorities, and John played a very important part in that. Of course, the team headed up by Emma Goodings, and we've got Gary and we've got Alan with us this evening, but there is a team there who have worked very hard. And of course, last but of course by no means least, Emma Goodings as our head of planning policy throughout this process. Regardless of your views on the local plan or local plan policy, I don't think there is anyone who would argue of Emma's knowledge, professionalism, intellectual grasp of all the issues beyond many comprehension, the level of detail and complexity which Emma approaches these and has been able to deal with these issues, her genuine dedication to the task and her demeanour, which, as I say, has not just earned respect locally, but has earned respect and commanded respect well beyond the district of Braintree through this process. Without wishing to compromise the very good working relationship I've had with Emma Goodings for the last 5 years by embarrassing her further, I hope all colleagues will agree, she's an absolute credit to this authority. We've been lucky to have her through this process, and we're delighted that Emma, continues not only to support this council, but actually in a role working with other councils, offers advice to wider planning matters, because her input is not just respected, it's in many cases it's absolutely essential. I hope the committee will be minded to will agree the recommendations this evening, so we can have a wider debate at full council. But Madam Chair, with your indulgence, I just wanted to offer those words as we come to the end of the local plan subcommittee process for this local plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cunningham. I would just like to endorse your comments and your words of thanks to officers who have lived and breathed this for a number of years, but also to my predecessor, Lynette Bowes-Flint, also to Councillor Mrs Scattergood, who's chaired the planning committee throughout this and has had considerable input into the local plan, and thanks go to all of them. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Abbott.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Yes, I would like to join Councillor Cunningham in thanking officers for their extraordinary amount of time and work over years on this process. And if I dare say, having to put up with us lot squabbling about it for most of that time. But that does bring me on to a serious point in response to what Councillor Cunningham said. All the people he mentioned obviously have had a very significant role, but I would say all members of this council have had a role. And perhaps if the administration had listened to us more in the main opposition group, we might have got our local plan done quicker, because we raised points which the inspectors agreed with, which were reasons why the plan was rejected twice. And I think it's also worth taking a little bit of time to thank residents, the thousands of residents who took part, whatever their views, whether they were for or against. And again, some of them did raise points which the inspectors agreed with, which were significant issues why the local plan could not be taken forward more quickly. And as I asked at the last full council, I think wherever we go to next with the local plan, and there will be another one, there'll be a review of this one and there will be another one, I think as a council we need to listen more. I won't say any more than that on that point. Some of us are not happy with this local plan in all aspects. I have significant reservations about the green buffer policy. I think it should have been more extensive. As Mrs Simpson raised in her representation, which I believe has gone to all members tonight, there's an issue about the designation of Cressington Green. I also have raised with officers concerns about the description of the Silver End factory redevelopment site. I believe it should have been a mixed-use site, not just a housing site for this important brownfield site. And as Emma alluded to, the renewable energy policy is a disappointment. We had hoped to have a specific policy in there for renewable energy on new developments. I note my letter to the two local MPs has still not been answered after 6 weeks. I shall send them another reminder asking about that very point. Why can't local planning authorities have the ability, where it's reasonable, to require developers, particularly on large sites, to include renewable energy? However, you'll be delighted to know that despite all that, this is not the time to ask for more changes. This is the time to adopt the plan. We have had years of debate over this. It has been a quite painful process for many people, and we need to stem the tide of speculative applications which have affected this district, particularly the villages, and the ward Bob Wright and I represent, and there are others I know, many others, have been particularly affected by this, and we need to have a robust local plan where we can say to developers, no, this is a line in the sand, we have a local plan, it's met the government's requirements, and your applications will be judged against us. As I said, it is not a political point, but on the G&I side of the council, our sincerely held belief that had the New Towns policy not been followed, or had it been followed in a different way, we would have had our local plan several years ago. But I'm not going to lay all the blame on this council. The government's had a role to play as well. Their tinkering and adjusting and refocusing the planning system has caused great difficulties, not least, of course, in housing supply figures, where you need to be basically have a PhD thesis running on it to understand even the first principles. It's so complicated, but there are words that apparently coming from government that they may simplify it. And just finally, on one figure, so I'll only draw one figure out from the inspector's letter. They are saying that we have well over 15,000 houses in the local plan. We were required to have just over 14,000. And they have described our housing position, and we still have appeals and more applications to come as, and I quote, robust. So for all of those reasons, Madam Chairman, I have no hesitation in moving that we accept officer recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. That has been moved. Do I have a seconder before we go any further? Councillor Cunningham, thank you. Right, thank you, Councillor Abbott. Well, you won't be surprised to hear I disagree with some of your comments, particularly around the garden communities, but I think the probably be a slightly wider debate at council at the end of the month, so I won't comment further, but I agree with much of what you said. I think particularly around the renewable energy policy, lack of, which I have also, on behalf of the council, wrote to Secretary of State some months ago and got a fairly non-committal response, it has to be said. But there we are, we will see. I have Councillor Thorogood and then Councillor Cunningham would like to come back. Councillor Thorogood.
Yeah, I've got two questions really, if I could ask them separately. One is to do with the changes 4.63. Can I just confirm that, or can you just confirm that is you're talking about the Crown Estates land? It says the new line says to the east of the A12, and from where I imagine it to go, I think it's to the west. But I just want to clarify that. And also the land, what it says to the southwest of the cricket pitches, because there has been some environmental assessment work going on. I just want that clarified. That I know it says there for recreation, but could you be more specific of what that would be used for, that area?
We had a discussion about this with the Parish Council and the landowner at the hearing sessions, which is where these changes have come from in the additional modifications. So what they are suggesting is that if the A12 is here, then their main residential parcel is to the west, you're right, of the A12, but they also have some land to the east of the A12, which they could put forward as part of master planning for open space and things, but that would be, as it says in the policy, that would be subject to master planning, whether the community would want open space on the other side of the A12. There's lots of issues, but they are opening up the fact that they have land to the other side of the A12, and they also have land around the cricket pitch, which potentially they could also be in the mix in terms of community facilities and open space and things as part of the development. What we need to make sure, though, is when we are master planning that we are getting the right open space in the right places. So that doesn't mean that we'd need to look carefully about the amount of open space on the actual development site to make sure that we are getting the right amount of open space and we're not pushing it all and making an overly dense site. But alternatively, if it works better for the community to be near the existing cricket pitches, for example, then that's something that the landowner is willing to consider and look at. So it's in the supporting text rather than in the policy. So it's in the supporting text as a sort of narrative around this is some additional land that they have. It's not in the allocation, so it's specifically not allocated. So anything that was residential, say, on those sites would be against policy because that's still the countryside. But it just gives that little bit of just description around the extra land that they have potentially available in Kelvedon.
So I've got another question. Just with that, it says there are 3 parcels of land in 4.64. The other parcel is between New Road and Coventry Road and the street. Is that right?
London Road.
Yeah.
Between London Road and
between London Road and the street, and also New Road. Is that field there? Is that right?
yes, it's also that's part of the site in terms of it's going to be a location for housing development. But I think the the sentence you're referring to, it talks about open spaces.
Sorry. My other question is some of the queries that I raised in the local plan modifications consultation in the wording of the sustainability appraisal. I think the page numbers have slightly changed. In the original, it was 48, page 48. I think it's page 49 now, 5.33. It says, in light of the deletion of the west of Braintree and Colchester Braintree garden communities from section 1 local plan, BDC identified a new spatial strategy option F, sites along the A12 corridor, A-S7, focusing development along the A120 corridor, which seeks to allocate development in the east of the district where the Colchester Braintree garden community was opposed, although at a much smaller scale. My concern was at the time, what did that really mean, and how big a development are you talking about?
I'm happy to fully respond to the email that or concerns that you raised in the last main modifications local plan subcommittee meeting we had. But in brief, the option F is an alternative scenario that was carefully composed with the aim of ensuring that the Section 2 local plan meets its legal compliance test, and it follows experience writing similar alternative scenarios for Section 1 local plan. So in a way it is, as you say, it's vague, but it's sort of pitched exactly correctly, and it was approved by the SA consultants, and both Section 1 and Section 2 sustainability appraisals have been found to be adequate by the inspectors, so I think the approach was is correct for its purpose.
So just to add to that, so it's an alternative approach, but it's one that is considered less sustainable than the preferred approach. So we've considered 7 different approaches, and we've discounted 6 of them, including that one. So that, just to give you a bit of comfort, it's not something that we're supporting through the plan. It's something that we've had to consider as an approach, but has been considered less sustainable than the approach that we followed in the local plan.
And lastly, I'm glad to know, there was where is it now, where it says halfway through the plan to take pressure off Braintree, you'll be looking at more development at Kelden and Fearing. I can't quite find it now, but yeah, here it is. Sustainable transport links at Kelden and Fearing will help focus growth away from Braintree halfway through the plan. Are you talking about existing, like the strategic growth area at Fearing, or are you talking about extra housing?
It's referring to the existing allocations that we've made through the local plan.
Thank you.
Good, right, fine. Councillor Cunningham, you wanted to come back, I think. Oh, I'm so sorry, Councillor Everard.
Is it that one? Yes. Yeah. In some respects, the last plan too, I liked the fact that we could build houses and address the needs of what we really want. But anyway, I'd like us to. I would have liked us to have done building our own houses in a broader sense, and that we could include a mixed housing and employment complexes, such as we have at Coggeshall, but essentially building to address our own needs, as I said before, and not being dependent on the delivery rate of the developers. It's essential to control, and I know that we do control what the developers build, but one thing that is an angst to me is the fact that we still have large areas which were passed years ago, Anfield Lane, BM1, and it's not come to fruition. What can we do about that? I don't know. I don't think I've got anything else to say at this stage. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Everard. I'll ask officers if they want to comment, but I agree. We know that we give planning permission for sites, and then you can sit and wait, which obviously impacts on our delivery. Quite strong representations have been made to the government about penalties, introducing penalties for developers if they don't make a start and come forward. And I think there have been mutterings from the government about doing something along those lines, but we've yet to see anything happen. I think we'll have to wait and see. Emma, I don't know if you want to come back at all on that point.
I suppose just on the housing trajectory and the pressure of housing more generally, I think the bit that all of us in the team, when the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill came out, the one thing that we all focused on was if you have an up-to-date local plan, you won't need to go through the 5-year housing supply test for 5 years. So we very much hope that that stays in, and if that stays in, you know, even if it comes forward in a year, that would still give us 4 years of protection from the 5-year supply, which I think would, you know, would be of huge benefit to the district. Just in terms of the developers at the moment, we're keeping in regular touch with the developers. We're talking to them about if sites aren't coming forward, and there's a variety of reasons. Some of them are, you know, are their own financial modelling. Others are negotiations with the landowners, because most of the sites, they only have options, and then once the permission comes through, then they're actually buying them. So there's quite a lot of discussions there. And we've been talking to them at the moment, and the availability of materials, bricks for one, is a real issue for them. So it's something that I think we're going to have to really watch over the sort of next 18 months or so, as to with the economy and with inflation the way it is, whether the house building rate, which has done record rates this year and the year before, may well fall. And if we don't have that protection of an up-to-date local plan giving you, you know, you don't have to have a 5-year supply, then it could be difficult to manage again. And we'll have to see if the government did sort of a COVID allowance for authorities in the last couple of years around the housing delivery test, whether they might do something similar if we go into recession. Don't want to predict us going into sort of deep recession, but I mean, who knows? But we are keeping on top of the developers. We are encouraging them to come forward. You know, once they've got permission, we want them to build, and we want them to build at a rate that means that they can build those sites and move on, and that lessens the impact as well for those residents living near it. That the building site can be delivered in the right way and delivered quickly, and then they move on. That's, I think, better for all of us. But yeah, we'll keep those discussions on.
Thank you, Emma. I have Councillor Cunningham come back, and then Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think just want to thank Councillor Abbott for moving the recommendations tonight in his non-too political speech. What I would say is my comments were referred to the work of this committee over the last, and of course we will have the debate if the committee agrees tonight at full council, and hopefully we can also reflect on several years of community engagement, the role of fellow residents in this process, and the approach that the administration has taken to working with the opposition parties through this process. Very different to some other local authorities. And also it's worth reflecting that during the 2015 to 29 administration, at one point there was 44 Conservatives out of 49. So this certainly hasn't been a one-party whitewash. But as I say, we can reflect on some of these things at full council, as hopefully we bring the matter to a close. But I think grateful for the Leader of the Opposition moving the recommendations this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you. As I think I'm the newest member of the Local Plan Subcommittee, so I haven't had to attend all the many meetings that the rest of you have. So I feel, yes, I definitely. So just one comment and a couple of questions. First of all, I think, yes, I note our position, disappointment really about not being allowed to have a requirement for renewable energy on dwellings. But it's interesting to see that there's going to be now a requirement for developers to produce a sustainability statement with applications. So I'm interested to see what that's going to look like coming forward in our planning applications. So that's obviously a new move, a new direction. The other point, can I just ask a question, please, about main modification 42, which is on page 63 of the agenda. Just as for clarification, the site is located within an area designated as a rural area by the Secretary of State under the Housing Act 1996. I hadn't heard of that before. I wonder if you could just clarify that.
Yeah, so we had a very long debate at the hearing sessions. So we wanted to continue to allocate rural exception sites. Not allocate them, to have them available in the local plan. And we wanted, if we were to have rural exception sites, to keep those affordable houses secured on them in perpetuity. And the only way that we can do that is through that particular act Act, which we did a lot of research on, and we had our barrister view and others on. That particular Act defines rural areas, and those defined rural areas are ones where the right to buy doesn't apply. So that's how we've got down to that. We tried to, in the submission plan, it's worded slightly differently. The inspectors wanted us to really clarify and hone in on what that meant. So that's why we got down to the Act as the definition, or whatever may supersede it. But it was around making sure that if we do have a rural exception site, those houses are kept in perpetuity as affordable housing.
Okay, thank you very much. And then I feel really churlish making this point of whether it's a huge document like this, but I have spotted the typo on page. Yeah, that's probably the only page I actually looked at. It's the policy LPP3 is just heading and misspelled incorrectly. It's page 89. I only read probably that page from the document.
Yes, thank you. We have read this between the team and between comms and between anyone who we can get to read the whole thing to try and proofread it. So we've printed versions for you tonight because we thought you might spot some more. We're then going to print more versions for council because you'll probably spot some more, and then we'll print the others for the community and for the team. But no, thank you. If anyone does spot them, please let me know. Yes.
Thank you. Well spotted, Councillor Parker, and well answered, Emma. Very neatly done. Councillor Mrs. Scattergood.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I really want to make a light-hearted comment, really. I've been on this committee since 2005, except I took a 2-year break just recently. And I'd just like to remind members that it was the Labour government that brought in the new way we made a local plan. And I remember once we signed off the 2005 plan, at the very first meeting I chaired, the newly formed, it wasn't called a local plan committee, but it was called something else. The lead officer of planning policy at that time started the meeting by saying, this is a new way of forming a plan. It's going to be much, much speedier. 17 years later, we have the plan. Just my comment.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Right, is there anybody else who would like to make any comment, ask another question? I'm not seeing any hands going up. So, members, we have the recommendations on pages 5 and 6. I am just going to read them through quickly, which is to note the findings of the Planning Inspector's report on the examination of the Braintree District Council Section 2 Local Plan received on 14th of June 2022 and their final schedule of main modifications, and to recommend to Council that it approves the formal adoption of the Braintree District Council Section 2 Local Plan, incorporating the Inspector's final main modifications as well as the other additional modifications and modifications to local plan maps in accordance with Section 23(3) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. This has been moved by Councillor Abbott, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Could I please a show of hands for the vote? Thank you, members. I'm delighted to say that that is unanimous. I think this is, well, quite a momentous occasion, actually. Well, oh, good point. Sorry. Well, right, okay. We will be bringing this to full council at the end of the month, where there can be even more debate and questions. But for this evening, that is the main business done. We have no urgent business either in public or private session. So I will close the meeting at, depending on which clock you look at, sort of 6:55-ish. Thank you. Thank you, members.